Noah Whitmore's hand on the small of her back was meant to look like a loving caress. But Isolde only felt the sharp press of his signet ring, a cold, hard secret in the blinding storm of flashbulbs. To the world, he was the adoring tech billionaire, and she was his radiant pregnant wife, but his fury was a palpable thing, a private chill the borrowed diamonds couldn't warm. Then she saw her, Lyra Voss, the starlet, watching them with a small, triumphant smile. In that instant, Isolde understood. The performance was over, and the curtain was about to be torn down. The premiere was for Crimson Tide, a film Noah's production company had financed on a whim. He'd called it a passion project, a phrase that dripped with the casual arrogance of a man who could burn millions on a hobby. The theater, a restored Art Deco palace in the heart of Los Angeles, was swarming with the city's elite. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and quiet desperation, the twin fragrances of Hollywood. Isolde's gown, a custom-made silk sheath in a shade of pale lavender, was meant to celebrate her pregnancy. The designer had called it ethereal, but Isolde felt anything but. The fabric, though light as air, felt like a shroud, each stitch a reminder of the role she was expected to play, the beautiful, serene vessel for the heir to the Whitmore fortune. Noah had chosen it, of course. He chose everything. Her clothes, her friends, her schedule. He had curated her life with the same meticulous, controlling precision he applied to his art collection. "Smile, darling," he murmured, his voice a low growl against her ear, meant for her alone. "You look like you're attending a funeral." Maybe I am, she thought, the words a silent rebellion. Mine. She forced her lips into a curve, a painful, unnatural stretch of muscle. The cameras flashed with renewed vigor, capturing the image of the perfect couple, Noah Whitmore, the self-made titan, and his lovely, pregnant wife, Isolde. They were a brand, a carefully marketed fantasy of wealth and happiness, and tonight the brand was about to suffer a catastrophic blow. The tension had been building for weeks, a low hum of discord beneath the surface of their polished lives. It started with late-night meetings that stretched into the early hours of the morning, the faint scent of a woman's perfume clinging to his clothes when he finally came home. Then came the hushed phone calls, the way he would angle his body away from her, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper. Isolde, ever the diplomat, the peacemaker, had tried to ignore it. She had blamed her pregnancy hormones, her own insecurity, anything but the cold, hard truth that was staring her in the face. But tonight, the truth had a name. Lyra. Lyra Voss was the lead actress in Crimson Tide, a woman whose ambition was as sharp and dangerous as broken glass. Isolde had met her once before at a cast dinner. Lyra had been all saccharine sweetness and cloying compliments, her eyes lingering on Noah for a fraction too long. Isolde had dismissed it as the typical fawning that followed her husband wherever he went. Now, seeing her on the red carpet, bathed in the same spotlight, Isolde saw the raw, undisguised hunger in her gaze. As they moved down the line of reporters, the questions were a predictable blur of fawning praise and intrusive curiosity. "Mr. Whitmore, what's the secret to your success?" "Isolde, you're glowing. Is it a boy or a girl?" "Noah, you've done it again. Another hit on your hands," Noah answered with his usual practiced charm, his hand never leaving Isolde's back. But his grip was tightening, his knuckles white against her skin. He was a volcano, simmering, ready to erupt. The trigger came from a young, overeager reporter from a gossip blog. "Mr. Whitmore, there are rumors of a particularly close relationship between you and your leading lady, Lyra Voss." Any truth to the speculation that your collaboration extends beyond the professional? The air crackled. The smiles of the other reporters froze on their faces. It was a brazen, reckless question, a violation of the unspoken rules of these events. Noah's charm vanished, replaced by a mask of pure, undiluted rage. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, narrowed to slits. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. The reporter, realizing his mistake, stammered, I was just asking." But Noah was no longer listening. He turned to Isolde, his face contorted in a snarl. "This is your fault," he hissed, his voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. "You and your pathetic insecurities. You can't stand to see me happy, can you? You have to ruin everything." Isolde's heart stopped. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The flashbulbs, which had been a steady rhythm, now became a frantic, chaotic frenzy. This was it. The moment she had been dreading, the public unraveling of their private lie. "Noah, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Not here." "Don't you dare tell me what to do!" he roared, his voice echoing in the sudden, shocked silence. He jabbed a finger at her, his hand shaking with fury. "You think this is about you? This baby?" He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You're nothing but a placeholder, a pretty little incubator. You think I wanted this? To be tied down to you?" Each word was a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. The crowd was a sea of stunned faces, their phones held aloft, recording every humiliating second. And through the blur of her tears, Isolde saw Lyra. She was standing just behind the line of reporters, her expression a perfect mask of feigned concern. But her eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, were shining with triumph. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. She had won. Isolde felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching a scene from a movie. This couldn't be her life. The man yelling at her, the man who had once promised to love and protect her, couldn't be her husband. The woman smiling in the background couldn't be the cause of it all. Then the world came rushing back in a torrent of shame and horror. The whispers started, a ripple of shock and scandal spreading through the crowd. Noah's security team, realizing the situation was spiraling out of control, moved in. Two large, imposing men in dark suits flanked Noah, their hands on his arms. "Sir, we need to go," one of them said, his voice firm but respectful. Noah, his face still flushed with rage, seemed to finally register the gravity of what he had done. He looked around at the sea of cameras, the shocked faces, the woman he had just publicly destroyed. For a fleeting moment, a flicker of something, regret, panic, crossed his face. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a cold, defiant glare. He allowed the guards to lead him away, not towards the theater entrance, but back towards the line of waiting cars. He didn't look back at Isolde. He didn't say another word. He just left her there, alone, in the wreckage of their life, the sound of 1,000 cameras clicking in her ears. The mistress had smiled, and the millionaire had been escorted away, leaving his pregnant wife to face the storm alone. The world, which had been a cacophony of shouting and flashing lights, suddenly went silent. Or perhaps Isolde had simply gone deaf. She stood frozen on the red carpet, a solitary figure in a lavender gown, the epicenter of a scandal that was already spreading like wildfire across the internet. The reporters, who had been a pack of hungry wolves just moments before, now seemed hesitant, their questions dying on their lips. They smelled blood, but even they seemed to recognize the profound cruelty of the moment. A hand touched her arm and she flinched. It was her publicist, a woman named Ivy, whose face was a mixture of pity and panic. "Isolde, we need to get you out of here," she said, her voice a low, urgent whisper. Isolde couldn't move. Her feet felt as if they were rooted to the spot. She looked out at the sea of faces, searching for something, anything that made sense. She saw Lyra again, her mask of concern now firmly in place. She was talking to the director, her hand on his arm, her expression one of deep, sorrowful empathy. The actress, Isolde thought with a sudden, bitter clarity. She's always performing. Ivy's grip on her arm tightened. Isolde, now. The words finally broke through the fog. Ivy, with the help of a theatre security guard, managed to steer her away from the red carpet, through a side door, and into the cool, quiet darkness of the theatre's backstage area. The contrast was jarring. One moment, she was being devoured by the public eye. The next, she was surrounded by dusty velvet curtains and the faint smell of old popcorn. The silence was a relief, but it was also a breeding ground for the pain that was now beginning to seep into her bones. The numbness was wearing off, replaced by a deep, shuddering ache that started in her chest and spread outwards, consuming her. The baby kicked, a sharp, sudden movement, as if it too had felt the shock of its father's rage. Isolde gasped, her hand flying to her belly, a protective, instinctual gesture. "He didn't mean it," she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. It was a lie, a desperate, pathetic attempt to hold on to the last vestiges of the life she thought she had. Ivy looked at her, her expression softening. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice filled with a sadness that went beyond professional concern. Yes, he did, and in that moment, Isolde knew it was true. The cruelty in Noah's eyes, the venom in his voice. That was not a momentary lapse. That was the real Noah, the man who had been hiding behind a mask of charm and affection. The man she had married was a stranger. The drive home was a blur. Ivy sat in the back with her, a silent, supportive presence. Isolde stared out the window at the glittering lights of Los Angeles, a city that had once seemed so full of promise, and now felt like a cage. She thought of the early days of her relationship with Noah, the whirlwind romance that had swept her off her feet. He had been so attentive, so charming, so perfect. He had showered her with gifts, whisked her away on private jets, introduced her to a world of unimaginable luxury. She had been a small-town girl, an art history student with a quiet life and simple dreams. He had been a force of nature, and she had been caught in his orbit. She had fallen in love with the fantasy he had created, the beautiful, gilded cage he had built around her. She had willingly walked into it, blinded by the glitter and the gold. And now, the bars were pressing in, suffocating her. When they arrived at the sprawling, modernist mansion in the Hollywood Hills, the house felt cold and empty. It had always been more of a museum than a home, filled with priceless art and minimalist furniture. But tonight, its sterility was a reflection of her own inner emptiness. Ivy helped her inside, her heels clicking on the polished marble floors. "Do you want me to stay?" Ivy asked, her eyes full of concern. Isolde shook her head. "No, I need to be alone." She needed the silence. She needed to let the full weight of the shattering crash down upon her. As soon as the door closed behind Ivy, the facade of composure she had been desperately maintaining crumbled. A sob, raw and ragged, tore from her throat, and she sank to the floor, her body shaking with the force of her grief. She cried for the man she thought she had married, the man who had promised her a lifetime of happiness. She cried for the baby inside her, a child who would be born into a world of scandal and heartbreak. She cried for herself, for the naive, trusting girl who had believed in fairy tales. Hours later, she was still on the floor, her tears spent, a hollow ache in their place. Her phone, which she had left in her clutch, had been buzzing incessantly. She knew what it was, a deluge of texts and missed calls from friends, family, and the media. The story would be everywhere by now. Millionaire publicly yelled at his pregnant wife at film premiere. The headlines would be brutal, the commentary even more so. With trembling hands, she picked up the phone. The screen was a nightmare of notifications, but it was one message that caught her eye, a text from an unknown number. "I know what you're going through. He did it to me too. If you need someone to talk to, I'm here." The message was followed by a name, Seraphine. Isolde stared at the screen, her mind racing. Who was Seraphine? Another woman from Noah's past, another victim of his charm and his cruelty. The message was a tiny, unexpected flicker of light in the overwhelming darkness. It was a lifeline, and she was drowning. She thought of Noah's cold, defiant glare as he was led away. He had shown no remorse, no regret. He had destroyed her, and he didn't care. She thought of Lyra's triumphant smile, the look of a victor who had just claimed her prize. They had been a team, a pair of predators who had hunted her down and torn her apart. A new feeling began to stir within her, a feeling that was foreign and yet strangely familiar. It was a spark of anger, a flicker of defiance. The grief was still there, a vast, empty ocean inside her. But now there was something else too, a single, burning ember of rage. She would not let them win. She would not let them destroy her. For the sake of her child, for the sake of the woman she used to be, she would fight back. Her fairy tale had become a nightmare, but she would not be the damsel in distress. She would be the survivor. With a newfound resolve, she typed a reply to the mysterious Seraphine. "Yes, I need to talk." The shattering was complete. The gilded cage was broken, and from the wreckage, something new, something stronger, was beginning to emerge. The days that followed were a blur of self-imposed exile. Isolde didn't leave the house, didn't answer the phone, didn't look at the news. The sprawling mansion, once a symbol of her gilded captivity, became her fortress. She moved through its silent, cavernous rooms like a ghost, the only sounds the soft padding of her bare feet on the cold marble and the frantic beating of her own heart. The outside world, however, was anything but silent. Ivy, against Isolde's initial wishes, had insisted on keeping her informed. The story was a media supernova, exploding across every news outlet, gossip blog, and social media platform. The video of Noah's tirade, shaky and grainy from a dozen different cell phones, was on a continuous loop, a digital monument to her humiliation. The narrative, she learned, was being carefully and expertly manipulated. Noah, ever the master strategist, had gone on the offensive. He had hired a crisis management team, the best in the business, and they were painting a picture of a man pushed to the brink by an unstable, emotionally volatile wife. An anonymous source close to the couple had told a major news outlet that Isolde's pregnancy had been difficult, that she was prone to fits of jealousy and paranoia. They whispered of her humble beginnings, a subtle, insidious suggestion that she was overwhelmed by the pressures of Noah's world, that she was the one who had cracked. And then there was Lyra. She played her part to perfection. In a tearful, exclusive interview, she spoke of her deep respect and admiration for Noah, her heartbreak over the unfortunate public incident. She portrayed herself as an innocent bystander, caught in the crossfire of a troubled marriage. "My only focus is on the art," she had said, her voice thick with false sincerity. "Noah is a genius, a visionary. It's a tragedy that his personal struggles are overshadowing his incredible work." The lies were a suffocating fog, twisting the truth until it was unrecognizable. Isolde was being erased, rewritten as the villain in her own story. The public, always hungry for a simple narrative, was beginning to buy it. The online comments, which had initially been a wave of sympathy for her, were now a murky tide of speculation and victim-blaming. "There are always two sides to every story," one comment read. "She probably drove him to it," said another. Isolde felt a cold, helpless rage. They were assassinating her character, and she was powerless to stop it. Noah had not contacted her. Not a text, not a call, not a single word. He had simply vanished from her life, leaving his team of professional liars to clean up his mess. It was the ultimate act of cowardice, the ultimate display of his chilling indifference. Her only lifeline was her twice-weekly therapy sessions, conducted via a secure video call. Dr. Anya Sharma was a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She listened patiently as Isolde recounted the years of subtle manipulation, the slow erosion of her self-esteem, the way Noah had isolated her from her old friends and family, making her completely dependent on him. "This is a classic pattern, Isolde," Dr. Sharma said during one session, her voice gentle but firm. "It's called coercive control. He didn't have to hit you to abuse you. He controlled your finances, your social life, your sense of self. The public outburst wasn't the beginning of the abuse, it was the culmination of it." The words were a revelation, a key that unlocked a door in her mind. She had never thought of herself as a victim of abuse. She had been unhappy, yes, lonely, certainly. But abused, the word seemed too harsh, too dramatic. But as Dr. Sharma broke it down, piece by painful piece, Isolde began to see the truth. The constant criticism disguised as constructive feedback, the gaslighting that made her question her own sanity, the isolation that he had framed as protecting her from the outside world. It was all there, a textbook case of psychological abuse. Her other source of solace came from an unexpected quarter, Seraphine. After their initial text exchange, they had spoken on the phone. Seraphine was a painter, a woman with a husky, world-weary voice and a sharp, cynical wit. She had dated Noah for 2 years, long before Isolde had come into the picture. Her story was eerily similar. The initial love bombing, the slow, insidious control, the eventual, brutal discard when he had grown bored of her. "He's a narcissist, honey," Seraphine had said, her voice devoid of any pity. "A textbook, grade A, gold-plated narcissist. He sees people as objects, possessions to be acquired and then discarded when they no longer serve his purpose. You, me, that little starlet. We're all just shiny toys to him." Seraphine's cynicism was a strange comfort. It was a bucket of cold water on the embers of hope that Isolde still foolishly harbored, the hope that Noah would come to his senses, that he would apologize, that they could somehow fix this. Seraphine's words were a brutal but necessary dose of reality. One rainy afternoon, a week after the premiere, Isolde was curled up on a sofa in the cavernous living room, staring at a massive, abstract painting that Noah had bought at an auction. It was a chaotic swirl of angry reds and blacks, a piece he had called a masterpiece of raw emotion. At the time, she had thought it was brilliant. Now it just looked like a mess. The doorbell rang, a jarring sound in the oppressive silence. Her first instinct was to ignore it. But then it rang again, a long, insistent peal. With a sigh, she heaved herself off the sofa and walked to the door, peering through the peephole. It was her older brother, Rowan. Her heart leapt. She hadn't spoken to him in months. Noah had never liked Rowan, had called him a small-town nobody with no ambition. He had subtly and skillfully driven a wedge between them, making Isolde feel that her family was somehow not good enough for her new life. She opened the door. Rowan stood on the doorstep, his face etched with worry. He was a carpenter, a man with calloused hands and a kind, steady gaze. He looked out of place in front of the cold, imposing facade of her mansion. "Isolde," he said, his voice soft. "I came as soon as I could." She didn't say a word. She just fell into his arms, the tears she had been holding back for days finally breaking free. He held her tightly, his embrace a solid, grounding presence in her chaotic world. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed into his shoulder. "I should have listened to you." "Shh," he said, stroking her hair. "None of that now. You're home. Well, not home, but you know what I mean." He led her back inside, his arm around her shoulders. He looked around at the cold, impersonal space, a frown on his face. "This place is a mausoleum," he said. "How have you been living here?" The question hung in the air, simple and yet profound. How had she been living here? She had been so blinded by the luxury, so seduced by the fantasy, that she had never stopped to realize how unhappy, how utterly alone she had become. Rowan stayed for the rest of the day. He didn't ask too many questions, didn't press her for details. He just sat with her, made her a cup of tea, and talked about home, about their parents, about the simple, uncomplicated life she had left behind. He was a breath of fresh air, a reminder of a world outside the toxic bubble Noah had created for her. As he was leaving, he turned to her, his expression serious. "You know you don't have to stay here, Isolde. You can come home. Mom and Dad would be thrilled. We'll take care of you." The offer was a lifeline, a tangible escape route from the prison she had been living in. But something held her back. It wasn't pride. It was a newfound, steely resolve that had been hardening within her over the past week. "I can't," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "Not yet. There's something I have to do first." Rowan looked at her, and for the first time, he saw not just his little sister, the victim, but a woman with a fire in her eyes. "What is it?" he asked. "I'm not going to let him get away with this," she said, her hand resting on her belly. "I'm not going to let him and his team of liars destroy me. He wanted a war. Fine. He's got one." The whispers and lies had tried to bury her, but they had failed. They had only succeeded in waking her up. The fire that Rowan had seen in Isolde's eyes was not a fleeting spark. It was a slow-burning, deep-seated furnace, fueled by a week of isolation, reflection, and the bitter taste of betrayal. The whispers and lies had been designed to break her, to cast her as the unstable, hysterical wife. But they had miscalculated. They had underestimated the resilience of a woman with nothing left to lose. Her first move was a practical one. The mansion, once her prison, was now her base of operations. It was a monument to Noah's ego, a labyrinth of his secrets, and she was going to explore every corner of it. She started in his office, a room she had rarely entered. It was a sleek, minimalist space, dominated by a massive desk made from a single piece of polished obsidian. It was the nerve center of his empire, and, she suspected, the heart of his deception. Noah was a man who believed in the power of technology, but he was also arrogant. He believed he was untouchable, that his digital world was impenetrable. He was wrong. Isolde, the art history student he had dismissed as a pretty little incubator, had a secret of her own. Before she had met Noah, she had paid her way through college by working as a research assistant for a professor who specialized in digital forensics, authenticating art online. She knew her way around a hard drive. His main computer was protected by a password, of course, but Isolde knew Noah. His ego was his greatest weakness. She tried the predictable combinations first. His birthday, the company's founding date, Whitmore. Nothing. Then she thought of Lyra. Her birthday? The premiere date of Crimson Tide? Still nothing. She sat back in his ridiculously expensive leather chair, the scent of his cologne still lingering in the air. She closed her eyes, trying to think like him. What was the one thing he valued above all else? What was the source of his power, his identity? It wasn't a person. It wasn't a date. It was a number. She remembered a drunken conversation at a dinner party months ago. He had been boasting about the first major deal he had ever closed, the one that had launched his career. He had called it his Genesis number, the amount that had turned him from a struggling entrepreneur into a player. She couldn't remember the exact figure, but she remembered it was in the millions. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, trying different combinations. And then it happened. The screen flickered, and the desktop appeared, a clean, uncluttered interface that belied the chaos it was about to reveal. She had been right. His password was the exact dollar amount of his first big success. His arrogance was her key. For the next 2 days, she barely slept. She combed through files, emails, and encrypted chat logs, a digital archaeologist unearthing the ruins of her marriage. What she found was far worse than she could have ever imagined. The affair with Lyra wasn't a recent fling. It had been going on for over a year. There were emails filled with lurid details, secret rendezvous planned in coded language, and promises of a future together. He had been with Lyra the night he had proposed to Isolde. He had been texting Lyra from the hospital waiting room while Isolde had been having her first ultrasound. The cruelty of it was breathtaking, but the betrayal went deeper than infidelity. She found a folder, cryptically labeled Contingency. Inside was a series of legal documents drafted by a team of ruthless divorce lawyers. It was a prenuptial agreement, but not the one she had signed. This was a different version, a shadow document filled with clauses that would leave her with virtually nothing in the event of a divorce. It painted a picture of her as a gold digger, a mentally unstable woman who had tricked him into marriage. It was a preemptive strike, a character assassination waiting to be deployed, and then she found the financials. Noah had always handled their money, telling her not to worry her pretty little head about it. She had a generous allowance, a credit card with no limit. She had thought she was a partner in his wealth. She was a fool. He had been systematically siphoning money from their joint accounts into a series of offshore holdings in Lyra's name. He had been building a new life with her, using Isolde's name and their marriage as a cover. The lavender gown, the baby shower, the public image of a happy couple. It was all a carefully constructed facade to hide his financial and romantic betrayal. The most damning discovery, however, was not about Lyra. It was about Seraphine. Isolde found a file containing a settlement agreement, a non-disclosure agreement, and a series of threatening emails from Noah's lawyers. He hadn't just discarded Seraphine. He had tried to ruin her. He had blacklisted her in the art world, spreading rumors that she was a fraud, that her paintings were forgeries. He had tried to silence her, to erase her, just as he was now trying to do to Isolde. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, forming a portrait of a man who was not just a narcissist, but a sociopath. A man who took pleasure in the destruction of others. Shaking with a mixture of rage and fear, she began to copy the files onto a secure, encrypted hard drive. This was her ammunition, her proof. The world saw her as a hysterical, jealous wife. She would show them the truth. Her phone buzzed. It was Seraphine. "Find anything interesting?" Seraphine asked, her voice laced with a knowing irony. "You have no idea," Isolde said, her voice hoarse. "Seraphine, he tried to destroy you." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I know," Seraphine said, her voice suddenly quiet. "He almost succeeded. It's taken me years to rebuild my career, My reputation. That man. He leaves a trail of scorched earth wherever he goes. I have proof, Seraphine, Isolde said, her voice gaining strength. Proof of everything. The affair, the money, what he did to you. It's all here. What are you going to do? Seraphine asked. I'm going to burn his kingdom to the ground, Isolde said, the words feeling like a vow. The unraveling was no longer just about her own pain. It was about justice. It was about ensuring that Noah could never do this to another woman again. She thought of her unborn child, and a fierce, protective instinct washed over her. She would not raise her son or daughter in the shadow of this man's lies. She would build a new world for them, a world based on truth and strength. She looked at the computer screen, at the web of deceit and cruelty that Noah had woven. He had thought he was so clever, so untouchable. But he had made one fatal mistake. He had underestimated the woman he had tried to break, the art history student, the small-town girl, the quiet, accommodating wife. That woman was gone. In her place was a warrior, armed with a hard drive full of secrets and a heart full of fire. The game had changed, and she was about to make her first move. The decision to fight back was one thing. Knowing how to fight was another. Noah was a Goliath, a man with an army of lawyers, a public relations machine, and a fortune that could buy silence and loyalty. Isolde was David, armed with a single digital slingshot. She knew she couldn't win a conventional war. She had to be smarter, more strategic. She had to use Noah's own tactics against him. Her first call was not to a lawyer, but to her brother, Rowan. He was on a plane to Los Angeles within hours. When he walked back into the mansion, he found a different woman from the weeping, broken sister he had left a few days earlier. Isolde was sitting at Noah's obsidian desk, her laptop open, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. The air in the room was charged with a new energy, a focused, determined intensity. All right, Rowan said, rolling up his sleeves. Tell me what you need. Rowan was her rock, her connection to the real world. He grounded her, kept the swirling emotions of rage and grief from consuming her. While she navigated the complex digital world of Noah's deceit, Rowan handled the practicalities. He changed the locks on the doors, installed a new security system, and vetted the household staff, quietly dismissing those whose loyalty was questionable. The mansion, once Noah's domain, was slowly but surely becoming hers. Her next step was to find the right legal counsel. She knew Noah's lawyers were the best in the business, sharks who smelled blood in the water. She needed someone who was not just brilliant, but fearless. Someone who wasn't intimidated by Noah Whitmore's name or his fortune. Seraphine had a suggestion. Her name is Selene Draven, she had said over the phone. She's not a fancy, big, firm lawyer. She's a lone wolf. She specializes in representing women against powerful, abusive men. They call her the Dragon Lady. Noah's lawyers are terrified of her. Selene Draven's office was in a modest, unassuming building in a less fashionable part of the city. The woman herself was anything but modest. She was in her late 50s, with a mane of wild, graying hair, sharp, intelligent eyes, and a wardrobe that seemed to consist entirely of black leather. She listened to Isolde's story without interruption, her expression unreadable. Isolde, nervous at first, found herself speaking with a clarity and conviction that surprised her. She laid out the years of control, the public humiliation, the financial betrayal. Then she slid the encrypted hard drive across the desk. "This is my proof," she said. Selene picked up the hard drive, weighing it in her hand as if it were a weapon. "And what is it you want, Mrs. Whitmore?" she asked, her voice a low, gravelly purr. "A generous settlement." A quiet, dignified exit. "I want him exposed," Isolde said, her voice unwavering. "I want the world to see him for who he really is. I don't care about the money. I want to take away his power. His power is his reputation, and I want to destroy it." A slow smile spread across Céline Dreven's face. It was a smile that sent a shiver down Isolde's spine, but for the first time, it was a shiver of excitement, not fear. "I like you, Mrs. Whitmore," she said. "You've got guts. Most women in your position just want to take the money and run. You want to burn the whole damn thing down. I can work with that." Céline's strategy was unconventional. She advised against filing for divorce immediately. "That's what he's expecting," she said. "He's got his army of lawyers ready for a war in the courtroom. We're not going to fight him on his turf. We're going to fight him in the court of public opinion. But we're going to do it on our terms, with our evidence." The plan was to leak the information, piece by piece, to a trusted, independent journalist who couldn't be bought or intimidated. It was a risky move, a high-stakes game of information warfare. But it was a game Isolde was now willing to play. While Céline began to lay the legal groundwork, Isolde focused on rebuilding herself. The therapy sessions with Dr. Sharma continued, helping her to understand the psychological scars of Noah's abuse and to reclaim her own narrative. She started a prenatal yoga class, not in a trendy, high-end studio, but in a small, community-based center far from the prying eyes of the paparazzi. For the first time in years, she was surrounded by normal people, by women who talked about their hopes and fears, their stretch marks and their cravings. It was a world away from the sterile, competitive environment of Noah's social circle. She also began to reconnect with her past. She spent hours on the phone with her parents, with old college friends, people she had drifted away from under Noah's subtle, isolating influence. She was rebuilding the support system he had systematically dismantled. One afternoon, as she was sorting through some old boxes in the back of a closet, she found a portfolio of her old drawings and sketches from her college days. She had been a talented artist, her passion art history, but her secret dream had always been to create art of her own. Noah had dismissed her talent as a cute hobby, encouraging her to focus on more serious pursuits like chairing charity committees and hosting dinner parties. She opened the portfolio, the smell of charcoal and old paper, a nostalgic perfume. The drawings were good. They were full of life, of emotion, of a perspective that was uniquely hers. A forgotten part of herself, a part she thought had been lost forever, stirred within her. She went out that day and bought a set of canvases, paints and brushes. She set up a makeshift studio in a spare room with a large window overlooking the canyon. At first, her hand felt clumsy, her strokes uncertain. But then something clicked. The anger, the grief, the fear, the burgeoning hope, it all began to flow out of her, onto the canvas. She painted with a ferocity she didn't know she possessed, the colors bold and raw, the images a chaotic, emotional landscape of her inner world. She was no longer just a victim. She was no longer just a wife or a mother-to-be. She was Isolde, an artist, a fighter, a woman rediscovering her own strength. The glimmer of strength had become a steady, unwavering flame. Noah had tried to reduce her to a beautiful, empty vessel. He had no idea that he had just unleashed a force of nature. The world had seen her fall. Now, they were about to watch her rise. Céline Dreven's choice of journalist was as unconventional as her legal strategy. His name was Orrin Cade, a seasoned investigative reporter with a reputation for being a bulldog. He had been pushed out of a major newspaper for his relentless pursuit of a story that had embarrassed a powerful advertiser. Now, He ran a small, independent news website, funded by subscriptions and a fierce commitment to the truth. He was, in Selene's words, unbuyable and unshakable. The meeting took place in a noisy, crowded coffee shop, a neutral ground where they were unlikely to be noticed. Orin Cade was a man who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He had tired eyes, a rumpled suit, and a cynical air. He listened to Isolde's story with a skeptical, world-weary expression. He had heard stories like this before, the scorned wife, the powerful husband. But then, Isolde produced the hard drive. "It's all there," she said, her voice steady. "Emails, financial records, settlement agreements, everything you need to verify my story." Orin's skepticism began to fade, replaced by a flicker of professional interest. He took the hard drive, his fingers drumming on the table. "If this is what you say it is," he said, his voice a low growl, "this is more than just a celebrity divorce. This is a story about the abuse of power." "That's exactly what it is," Selene said, stirring her coffee. "And Noah Whitmore has been getting away with it for far too long." Orin agreed to look at the evidence, making no promises. But Isolde had a feeling she had found her champion. Orin Cade was a man who had his own score to settle with the powerful and the corrupt. While they waited for Orin to do his work, Isolde focused on another front. She knew that Noah's power was built on a carefully constructed image of success and invincibility. To bring him down, she needed to find the cracks in his empire. She needed an ally on the inside. She thought of the household staff Rowan had dismissed, the people who had worked for Noah for years, who had seen and heard everything. But they were all bound by ironclad non-disclosure agreements, and they were too afraid of Noah's wrath to speak out. Then she remembered a name from the files on the hard drive, Gareth Holloway. He had been Noah's chief financial officer for over a decade, the architect of his financial empire. But he had been fired abruptly a year ago, replaced by a younger, more compliant executive. The separation had been acrimonious, and the settlement agreement she had found was particularly harsh, filled with threats and accusations. Gareth Holloway was a man with a grievance. Finding him was difficult. He had dropped off the map, his professional profiles deleted, his contact information scrubbed from the internet. But Rowan, with his practical, real-world skills, was a surprisingly good detective. He tracked Gareth down to a small, secluded house in a quiet coastal town a few hours north of Los Angeles. Isolde drove up to meet him alone. She found him in his garden, a man who looked older than his years, his face etched with stress and disappointment. He was wary at first, his eyes full of suspicion. He thought she was a messenger from Noah. Another threat, another warning. "I'm not here to threaten you, Mr. Holloway," she said, her voice gentle. "I'm here because I think we have a common enemy." She told him her story, told him about the hard drive, about what she had discovered. As she spoke, she saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes, a shared understanding of Noah's capacity for cruelty and deception. "He ruined me," Gareth said, his voice thick with a bitterness that was still raw. "I built that company with him. I worked day and night, sacrificed my family, my health. And when I started to question his methods, when I told him that what he was doing was not just unethical but illegal, he threw me out like I was nothing. He threatened to destroy my reputation, to make sure I would never work in this industry again." "I know," Isolde said. "I have the proof, the emails, the memos. I know you tried to stop him." Gareth looked at her, a long, searching gaze. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to help me," she said. "You know where the bodies are buried. You know the secrets of his business, the illegal trades, the shell corporations, the tax evasion. Orin Cade is going to break the story about the abuse, the infidelity. But I want to hit him where it really hurts. I want to dismantle his empire." It was a dangerous proposition. Gareth had signed an NDA. If he spoke to her, if he helped her, he could lose everything. He could face legal action, financial ruin. "Why should I trust you?" he asked. "Because I'm not like him," Isolde said. "I'm not driven by greed or power. I'm driven by the need for justice. For myself, for my child, and for everyone else he has hurt. Including you." She left him with a copy of the hard drive and her number. The drive back to Los Angeles was filled with a nervous anticipation. She had laid her cards on the table. Now she had to wait and see if her gamble would pay off. 3 days later, she got a call from an unknown number. It was Gareth. "I'm in," he said, his voice firm, resolute. "That man has to be stopped, and I'm going to help you do it." The alliance was forged. The artist, the lawyer, the journalist, and the disgraced CFO. It was an unlikely team, a band of outsiders united by a common goal. They were a quiet, underground resistance, preparing to launch an attack on a king in his castle. Isolde felt a surge of adrenaline, a feeling of empowerment that was intoxicating. She was no longer a solitary victim, fighting a lonely battle. She was a general, assembling her army. The long game was about to begin, and she was ready to play. The world had seen Noah Whitmore as a titan of industry, a brilliant, untouchable genius. They were about to learn that even titans can fall. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in strategic patience. Selena Draven orchestrated the campaign with the precision of a chess grandmaster, each move calculated, each piece positioned for maximum impact. The long game was not about a single dramatic explosion. It was about a slow, deliberate dismantling of Noah Whitmore's world, brick by brick. The first story from Orrin Cade dropped on a quiet Tuesday morning. It was not the bombshell Isolde had expected. Instead, it was a smaller, more focused piece, an expose on the toxic work environment at Whitmore Enterprises. Orrin, using anonymous sources that had been carefully vetted by Selena, painted a picture of a company ruled by fear and intimidation, where employees were routinely humiliated, and Noah's volatile temper was the stuff of legend. The article didn't mention Isolde or Lyra by name. It was a subtle, strategic strike at the foundation of Noah's public image as a brilliant, beloved leader. The reaction was immediate. The story was picked up by mainstream news outlets, and other former employees, emboldened by the anonymity, began to share their own stories on social media. The hashtag Whitmore Screams started trending. It was a small crack in the facade, but it was a crack nonetheless. Noah's response was predictable. His PR team issued a statement dismissing the article as the bitter ramblings of a few disgruntled former employees and a desperate attempt by a failing journalist to gain attention. They announced a new, company-wide wellness initiative, a transparent attempt to control the narrative. But Selena and Orrin were already one step ahead. A week later, the second article dropped. This one was about Lyra Voss. Orrin had dug into her past, uncovering a pattern of relationships with powerful, wealthy men, a trail of broken promises and accusations of opportunism. He published text messages provided by a jilted ex-boyfriend that showed Lyra boasting about her conquest of Noah Whitmore, her plan to become the next Mrs. Whitmore. The article painted her not as a victim, but as a ruthless, calculating social climber. The public narrative began to shift. Lyra, who had been portrayed as the innocent artist, was now seen in a new, harsher light. Her tearful interview was re-examined, her words now sounding hollow and manipulative. The tide of public sympathy, which had been turning against Isolde, began to flow in the other direction. Isolde watched all of this from the quiet sanctuary of her home. She continued to paint, her canvases filling with bold, abstract expressions of her journey. The art was her therapy, her way of processing the chaos. She was also preparing for the arrival of her baby, her due date now just a few weeks away. The nursery was ready, a calm, serene space filled with light and soft colors. It was a room of hope, a promise of a new beginning. The third strike was the one that truly shook Noah's empire. This was where Gareth Holloway's information became invaluable. Orrin Cade, with Gareth as his anonymous source, published a meticulously researched, deeply damning investigation into Whitmore Enterprises' financial dealings. It was a complex story of offshore shell corporations, illegal insider trading, and massive tax evasion. The article was dense, filled with financial jargon and legal complexities, but the conclusion was simple and devastating. Noah Whitmore was a crook. This time, the response was not from Noah's PR team. It was from the SEC and the IRS. Both agencies announced that they were launching formal investigations into Whitmore Enterprises. The company's stock, which had been wobbling since the first article, now plummeted. Investors panicked. The board of directors, who had once been Noah's loyal sycophants, began to distance themselves, their statements filled with carefully worded concerns about corporate governance. Noah was cornered. He was being attacked on all fronts: his reputation, his relationship, his business. He was a man who was used to being in control, and for the first time in his life, he was losing it. He tried to fight back. He filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against Orrin Cade for defamation. He had his lawyer send threatening letters to Selene and Gareth. He even tried to reach out to Isolde, leaving a series of rambling, desperate voicemails on her phone. They were a bizarre mixture of threats, apologies, and pleas for a reconciliation. "We can fix this, Isolde," he had said in one message, his voice strained. "You, me, the baby. We can be a family. Just call off your dogs." Isolde listened to the messages with a strange sense of detachment. The man on the phone was a stranger to her, a pathetic, desperate creature who bore no resemblance to the powerful, confident man she had married. She didn't respond. She just deleted the messages and forwarded the audio files to Selene. The final piece of the plan was the most personal, the most painful, and the most powerful. It was time for Isolde to tell her story. But she wouldn't do it in a splashy, prime-time interview. She would do it in her own way, on her own terms. She agreed to a single, in-depth print interview with a respected female journalist from a major magazine, a woman known for her sensitive, nuanced profiles. The interview took place in her home, in her art studio. She spoke calmly and eloquently, not as a victim, but as a survivor. She told the story of her marriage, the subtle abuse, the slow erosion of her identity. She talked about the premiere, the public humiliation, the discovery of his betrayal. And she showed the journalist her paintings, the raw, emotional art that had been her salvation. But she didn't just talk about Noah. She talked about Seraphine and about the other women Noah had hurt. She gave a voice to the voiceless, shining a light on his pattern of abuse. And then she dropped the final bombshell. She played the audio of Noah's voicemails, his desperate, manipulative pleas. The article was published a week before her due date. It was accompanied by a series of beautiful, powerful photographs of Isolde, pregnant and radiant, standing in front of her art. The headline was simple: "The Unmaking of a Whitmore." The story was a sensation. It was the final, devastating blow to Noah's reputation. The public saw the full picture now: the abusive husband, the cheating lover, the corporate criminal. He was no longer a titan. He was a pariah. The long game had been won. But Isolde knew the final act was yet to come. The reckoning was inevitable, and she would be ready for it. The end came not with a bang, but with the quiet, relentless turning of the wheels of justice. Noah Whitmore, the man who had once seemed to bestride the world like a colossus, was brought down by a series of mundane, bureaucratic processes, subpoenas, depositions, and indictments. The empire he had built on a foundation of lies and intimidation crumbled under the weight of its own corruption. The SEC froze his assets. The IRS filed a lien on his properties. The board of directors, in a desperate act of self-preservation, voted to remove him as CEO of Whitmore Enterprises, the company he had named after himself, the symbol of his power and his ego, had cast him out. Lyra Voss, seeing the writing on the wall, had fled. Her career was in tatters, her name now synonymous with scandal and opportunism. She had been a co-conspirator in Noah's deception, and she was now paying the price. Isolde felt a fleeting, distant pity for her. Lyra had been a pawn in Noah's game, a victim of her own ambition and his manipulation. But it was a pity that was quickly eclipsed by the overwhelming sense of relief. Noah, holed up in a rented penthouse, his own mansion, now a piece of evidence in a federal investigation, was a man unmade. The media, which had once fawned over him, now hounded him, their cameras capturing the image of a haggard, defeated man. The charm was gone, replaced by a permanent scowl, the confidence replaced by a hunted, paranoid look in his eyes. The reckoning for Isolde, however, was a much quieter, more personal affair. It came on a warm, sunny afternoon in a sterile, white hospital room. Her son was born, a healthy, beautiful baby, with a full head of dark hair and his mother's calm, steady eyes. She named him Rowan after the brother who had been her rock, her protector. Holding her son in her arms, Isolde felt a sense of peace that she hadn't known in years. The anger, the grief, the desire for revenge, it all seemed to melt away, replaced by an overwhelming, all-consuming love for this tiny, perfect human being. He was her future, her hope, her reason for everything. Selene Draven visited her in the hospital, bringing a bouquet of flowers and a stack of legal documents. The divorce was being finalized. Noah, facing a mountain of legal troubles and financial ruin, had agreed to all of their terms. He had given up any claim to custody of their son. He had signed over a significant portion of his remaining, unfrozen assets. "He didn't even put up a fight," Selene said, a note of surprise in her voice. "It's over, Isolde. You won." But Isolde didn't feel like a victor. She just felt free. The war was over, and she had survived. That was enough. A few days later, there was another visitor. It was Seraphine. She stood in the doorway of the hospital room, a tentative smile on her face. She was holding a small, wrapped gift. "I hope this is okay," she said, her voice soft. "Of course," Isolde said, her heart swelling with gratitude for this woman, this stranger who had become a friend, an ally. Seraphine walked over to the bed, her eyes fixed on the sleeping baby in Isolde's arms. "He's beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you," Isolde said, "for everything." "You did it, Isolde," Seraphine said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You did what I was never brave enough to do. You took him down." "We did it," Isolde corrected her. "We all did." Seraphine gave her the gift. It was a small, framed painting, a beautiful, abstract watercolor of a sunrise, the colors soft and hopeful. "For the nursery," Seraphine said. "A new dawn." The words hung in the air, a perfect summation of everything Isolde was feeling. It was a new dawn for her son, for all the women Noah had wronged. The final act of the reckoning came a week later. Isolde was at home, in the mansion that was now legally hers, a place she was slowly but surely transforming from a cold, sterile museum into a warm, loving home. She was feeding Rowan when she saw the news on television. Noah Whitmore, on the advice of his lawyers, had accepted a plea bargain. He pleaded guilty to charges of tax evasion and securities fraud. In exchange for his cooperation in a wider investigation into corporate corruption, he would receive a reduced sentence. The camera showed him walking out of the courthouse, his face pale and drawn. He was no longer the charismatic billionaire, the titan of industry. He was just a man, a criminal, his life in ruins. He looked up, and for a moment his eyes seemed to meet the camera's lens. There was no anger, no defiance. There was just a vast, empty nothingness. Isolde looked down at the son in her arms, at his tiny, perfect face. She felt a sudden, fierce wave of love and protectiveness. Noah had tried to use this child as a weapon, a pawn in his cruel game. He had failed. This child would grow up knowing nothing of his father's darkness. He would grow up surrounded by love, by art, by truth. She turned off the television. The story was over. Noah Whitmore's chapter in her life was closed. The reckoning was complete. And as she held her son close, she knew that her own story, the real story, was just beginning. The years that followed were not a fairy tale. They were real life, messy and complicated, filled with the ordinary challenges and extraordinary joys of motherhood. The world did not forget the scandal of Noah Whitmore, but its memory faded, replaced by new headlines, new dramas. For Isolde, the past was not a ghost that haunted her, but a scar that reminded her of her own strength. She sold the mansion in the Hollywood Hills. It held too many memories, too many ghosts. She bought a smaller, more modest house in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood, a house with a big backyard and a sun-drenched room that she turned into her art studio. It was a home, not a showcase, a place filled with the sound of a child's laughter, the smell of paint and baking bread. Her art career, which had been born out of the ashes of her pain, flourished. Her paintings, raw and emotional, resonated with people. A small independent gallery in her neighborhood offered her a show. To her surprise, it sold out on the first night. The critics called her work fearlessly honest, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. She was no longer Isolde Whitmore, the disgraced wife of a fallen tycoon. She was Isolde Voss, an artist in her own right, her work standing on its own merit. She reconnected with her family, with the simple, uncomplicated love she had left behind. Rowan was a constant presence in his nephew's life, a doting uncle who taught him how to build things with his hands, how to skip stones across a lake. Her parents visited often, their faces filled with a quiet pride at the woman their daughter had become. Seraphine remained a close friend, a sister forged in the fires of a shared experience. They supported each other's careers, celebrated each other's successes, and provided a safe harbor for each other's fears. They were survivors, two women who had taken their pain and transformed it into something beautiful and strong. As for Noah, he served his time, a reduced sentence in a low-security federal prison. He was released after 3 years, a man stripped of his fortune, his power, his name. He faded into obscurity, a cautionary tale whispered in the boardrooms and back rooms of the world he had once dominated. Isolde never saw him again. She never wanted to. He was a closed chapter, a story that no longer had any power over her. One sunny afternoon, Isolde was in her backyard, watching her son, now a bright, curious 6-year-old, chase butterflies. He was a happy, well-adjusted child, full of life and laughter. He had her eyes, her artistic talent, and her brother's kind, steady heart. He was her masterpiece, her greatest creation. He ran to her, a dandelion in his hand. "Make a wish, Mommy," he said. his face alight with the pure, uncomplicated joy of childhood. Isolde smiled, taking the dandelion from his hand. She looked at her son, at her home, at the life she had built for herself. A life of peace, of purpose, of love. She had everything she had ever truly wanted. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and blew. The seeds scattered in the wind, tiny parachutes of hope, disappearing into the bright blue sky of her new dawn. She had already made her wish, and it had come true. This story is a testament to the power of resilience and the courage it takes to stand up to abuse, no matter how powerful the abuser. Isolde's journey from a gilded cage to a life of freedom and purpose is a reminder that our deepest wounds can often lead to our greatest strengths. If her story moved you, if it made you believe in the possibility of a new dawn after the darkest of nights, please show your support. Like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear this message, and subscribe for more stories of survival, strength, and the incredible power of the human spirit. Your support helps us to continue telling stories that matter, stories that empower, and stories that remind us that even after the most devastating storm, the sun will rise again. Thank you for watching.